Thank you for tuning in to the Peoplz and Dragons. If you enjoy the content we provide, then subscribe, like, and maybe join in on the action at www.pndrpg.com. Haven City, an ugly city. Episode 8, Act 3, Walls of Blood. We hear the sound of fists hitting fists and the crashing of impact onto leather mats echoing throughout an old rundown torchlit dojo on a fisherman's wharf off the coast of Haven. Turning the corner, we see a young woman, Nam-Ki, in mid-air throwing a flurry of punches toward a massive G-type resembling a humanoid black dragon, Drav Mas, his thick, black scales absorbing the onslaught with only his one arm. Nam's arms and legs are dripping in golden hot nuclear flames, her featherweight body staying afloat as she lands her 45th punch before hitting the ground, then rolling under her draconic opponent's legs, baiting him to turn around. Then she somersaults back over his head, staying nimble and keeping out of sight of his peripherals, when wham! Nam gets whacked out of the air and sent flying into a wooden wall. Nam pulls her head out of the shredded wood planks, a long smile on her face and both of her eyes glowing, two different colors, one gold and the other lavender. Drav Mas laughs as he's enjoying himself. Drav is a G-type who was physically mutated beyond belief into what most consider a monster out of a manual or something straight out of a dungeon. However, unlike most G-types driven to flee into the bayou, Drav made a living as hired muscle for the dirty work. It was hard for Drav to get a good fight, as usually things die when hit by him, and it wasn't in his game to pull punches. Luckily, Nam doesn't need him to. These two met at a bar in Smaven's, and things have been moving quite fast ever since. Empowered and charged by her nuclear genetics, Nam dashes forward with increased speed, sending a golden flaming fist into Drav's stomach. Drav eats it and begins laughing and grabs her whole head mockingly. Nam, slightly angered by his big smelly hands hugging her face, begins to glow brighter and lets out a war shout as she grabs his arm and with enhanced strength flips him over her shoulder. Drav, surprised by her burst of strength, is easily flung onto the ground, followed by Nam's fist crashing into the ground next to him. Drav begins laughing while looking up at Nam, who also chuckles a bit and extends her hand. Drav smacks it away and brings himself to his feet. Drav tells Nam he thinks her temper is going to be the end of her one day, referencing the nuclear energy field her body is currently emitting, slowly corroding her clothes and his own scales. But if it weren't for his slight healing factor, Drav wouldn't be so close. A voice approaches from across the dojo. We see Deftude walking toward them cloaked in all white, his pitch black mask upon his face. Nam-Ki and I have it under control. A few more lessons and she will be a threat to everyone but herself. Deftude turns toward Drav. Are your men planted? Drav looks at Nam. Nam looks at her watch and tells him it's 8 o'clock. Drav informs Deftude he should be hearing something real soon. Deftude nods and begins to speak when he's suddenly interrupted. Standing by the steps, we see a scrawny little man with rat-like features.
Sir, it's time.
Drav shoots the rat a piercing look. Deftude backs out of the torchlight and into the shadows. The rat man is terrified and flinches at the hawking G-type stalking over toward him.
You told me to...
Drav roars, causing his new hireling to cower in pure terror. The rat man's fear fueling Drav's rush of adrenaline. We see Nam dexterously twirling several cards through and around her fingers until it appears that they've all vanished except for one pinched between her two fingers. She observes it with her lavender eye, then expresses minor sympathy for the rat man's fate. Drav growls, "Well, Slip, I have things to be doing." Shakily, Slip straightens up.
Yes, sir. Of course, sir. The guards we bribed have swapped in. They'll cut the power in 15 minutes just before you head in.
Drav nods, then in one swift motion, strikes Slip in the neck with his forearm. With a sickening crunch, Slip collapses to the ground, coughing and sputtering. Drav looks down at him as the rat man's breathing goes from laborious to shallow to non-existent. Drav tells Deftwood, "It's time." Deftwood turns and tells them both to remember that this prison is no ordinary prison. The Survey Day have long infiltrated District 9's law enforcement and hold all of the district's worst prisoners for bodies to reincarnate into, therefore have them under close watch. Drav murmurs, "Survey Day, Survey Night, a cop is a cop, I'll kill them all," as he spits a glob of acid that burns right into and through the floor. Deftwood nods to Nam and Drav as they depart the Redwood Wharf. The Golgan District, one of Haven's most culture-shocking districts. A district run by an oligarchy consisting of various business leaders. It is governed only in the sense that it maintains and records all contracts and utilizes a police force to intervene and punish those who break them. The Golgan District's lifeblood are agreements made between two individuals of sound mind. These are called contracts. They are used in almost every deal made in Golgan, from simple business transactions to more complicated transactions involving subjective and intangible concepts such as love and friendship. For example, a lonely man may pay a person good money to be their best friend or set time period, whether it be a minute or until death. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and property under a greater contract, but these can be negotiated away. Someone once let himself be killed and literally eaten in exchange for the murderer and or cannibal to ensure his wife and children had all of their basic human needs accounted for. The Golgan Council did nothing. After all, both parties agreed to the contract and both parties fulfilled their end of the bargain. We descend into a busy Golgan police station where we see robotic office workers clanking around along with the hustling and bustling officers escorting suspects, passing phones and papers and running into each other. The breaking news is blasting on all of the televisions inside of the station. Ray Lagarian, business head and CEO, all that jazz, has been captured by G-Types, further stewing the pot and causing discord between Nebu and Ray Lagarian nations. However, the word in the office is that all that jazz was spotted in the clutches of a gang faction here in Golgan, which has the office panicking because shit just got real. It doesn't help that Golgan has its own issue with a string of assassinations of powerful figures. Granted, most of its victims have been powerful men who exploit legal loopholes within contracts to essentially enslave the poor, among other wicked feats, but still, it wasn't a safe place for anyone, let alone Ray Lagarian royalty. The good news is, if she did wind up dead, they would know about it because whoever has been tucking these men in at night is taking pictures of their corpses with the message written on the wall in their blood. This man broke the contract, and sending it anonymously to all news outlets. Psycho shit, which is why officers cannot determine the intent of who was doing their job and taking it to the next level. We see a man climbing out of the window of a high-end loft. Behind him, inside the home, we see a dead scumbag, his blood painted into words on the wall, reading, "This man broke the contract." We see our guy descending down the side of a building and hits the sidewalk and begins walking with purpose down a Golgan streetway, his head down, obscured by the upright collars of his coat. The neon pink streetlights illuminating Jax Erlin's red mane and beard. On his way to the warp grid, warp key in hand, and just before stepping on the platform, he spots a large group of thugs surrounding a woman and shepherding her into the alleyway. Jax hesitates and looks at his watch, then back at the thugs. Jax doesn't often bother with small fries. He sets his gaze on each thug one by one, judging their intentions. He decides he couldn't very well leave the woman to be groped, robbed, and raped, in that order from left to right, the last thug seemingly the ringleader with the ugliest of intentions. Jax knows this by way of his mutated eyes that see through lies and judge the hearts of men. We cut to the woman running into a dead end. She turns around and begins screaming for her life. The two nasty thugs get intimidated by her scream and begin to panic, looking toward the ringleader for further instructions. "What are you looking at me for? If you want in, you gotta do what I told you to do." The leader takes a toke of his cigar and points at her. "And that starts with shutting her up." Just as he points, Jax lands in between the leader and the two goons. Jax sets his mystical eyes upon the leader, and before he could move, in one motion, Jax unsheathes his katana and slices off the leader's arm at the joint, clean. The arm goes spinning in the air and lands and rolls over to the goon's foot. Just as the leader screams in pain, Jax sends his katana through his bottom lip as the blade scrapes against the bottom row of his platinum dentures. Jax leads him around to his side, the leader tippy-toeing to avoid further pain on the tip of his blade. Jax tells them all that if he ever sees them again, he wouldn't be as nice. The leader moans and pleads as best as he can when Jax rips his sword from his mouth, flinging the blood onto the pavement before sheathing it. The leader falls to the ground, bleeding profusely, but that does not stop him from gathering himself up and fleeing from Jax and the woman along with his two goons. Turning to the stunned woman, he drapes his coat over to cover her in the cold dark, then turns and walks toward the warp grid. The woman calls for him and asks him if he is worried that they'll find him. Jax turns and replies, "Nah, it's pretty dark out. I've done this kind of thing a few times before." He then leaves, ignoring her response. He had better things to do than bask in the compliments from would-be victims convinced that he was some kind of hero. We cut to the inside of a fairly sizable prison within District 9. We see a robed cultist being escorted by two guards down to prison cells as prisoners run up to the bars of their cells and curse at the cultist.
"I know what you doing, man. Y'all are sick, man. You won't get away with this."
Another prisoner shouts and pleads for them to let him go, but is completely ignored. The cultist and his escorts reach the cell of a fairly muscular and fit young man who is lying on the cell floor, sedated beyond belief. The robed cultist looks at the two guards and tells them that this subject will do and to have him brought down into the catacombs for the ritual. They open the cells and drag the man out as the rest of the prisoners go wild in anger when suddenly the lights in the entire prison go out. The cultist becomes alert and bewildered. "What happened to the power?" He runs over to the closest door, illuminating his way with a hand full of takena, glowing purple, as he peers into the next corridor to see if the lights are also out, and they are. The guards begin to panic when they see someone across from them within the same cell block walking toward them closely. The cultist turns and sees the glowing gold and lavender eyes of ACTIII standing at the other end of the hall. "Who are you? Show yourself!" the guards shout. ACTIII begins walking slowly toward them while dragging her fingers across the prison bars, her hands glowing with golden nuclear radiation, causing the prison bars to fizzle and corrode. The cultists fire a bolt of takena energy that flies toward Nam, but she swiftly sidesteps it and begins running down the hall toward them. The two guards begin firing their electromagnetic beam pistols, but Nam effortlessly flips, dodges, and evades their inaccurate fire into the darkness. A prisoner reaches out of their cell and grabs her by her arm, but with her swift reflexes, she grabs his wrist and ignites her arm in golden flames, which corrodes his arm with flaming nuclear radiation, causing it to fall completely off, sending him tumbling back into his cell. She then grabs one of the prison bars and rips it off of the cell and begins deflecting the oncoming electro beams and takena blasts. Nam is a monk and has been a practitioner of a special discipline since the age of 3. With Zen-like clarity of her surroundings, Nam twirls the prison bar behind her back and all around while twirling toward them, her footwork extremely finesse, her eyes closed and her heart calm, until she finally decides to deflect a takena bolt back at the cultist's head, blowing it off of his shoulders. She then charges the prison bar with nuclear energy, causing it to glow gold, and then hurls it directly into the chest of one of the guards, impaling him into the doorway. The bar then begins to hum at a high frequency while in his chest and explodes with a massive nuclear electromagnetic pulse that disables the other guard's gun, causing it to get hot and explode in his hands, taking his hand off completely. He drops to his knees, holding his wrist, when suddenly Nam appears in front of him with feet planted and throws a powerful punch that stops right in front of his face. But a wave of force emits from her knuckles, sending the flesh of his face peeling back, then explodes his entire head. Without hesitation, Nam continues to run through the prison corridors. We cut to a control room where officers are shouting orders and commanding backup to be sent to the cells where Nam can be seen striking down hordes of guards on the surveillance cameras, when suddenly, Drav Maz comes crashing through the ceiling, landing on one of the guards, squashing him. The guard next to him aims his firearm and fires 2 shots, the first missing completely, the second ricocheting off of Drav's scales and clips the officer in his neck. Drav grabs the man's head, crushes it in his palms like a tomato, and hurls him into the wall of television screens. He then rampages in the small room of officers filled with hate for law enforcement and gorges, rends, and crushes them all. The walls and screens are painted with blood. The 2 officers, bribed to assist Drav in the prison break, run into the room, trying not to slip on the blood on the floors, and they type in the secret survey day password that opens the secret entrance into the catacomb prison. The officers then turn to Drav and nod, waiting for their next objective, when Drav spews a gout of acid at one guard that begins to completely eat through his torso, leaving just his legs. The guard screams and turns to run, but with great hate. Drav grabs the man, pulling him back and slams him into the pool of acid and mops him through it and the remains of his buddy, then kicks his melting corpse into the wall before exiting the room. All we see is darkness. We hear the cries of cultists being torn apart along with grunts and roars of Drav.
No! Please!
A doorway opens in the darkness and we see Nam and Drav covered in the blood of the dead, standing, looking down at one of their objectives. We see a heavily sedated Six laying in a pool of blood, beaten and tortured with his arms tied behind his back. He looks up, both eyes swollen shut, blinded by the light. We cut to a large aircraft on the roof of a prison as 50 to 60 of District 9's worst criminals board the aircraft along with Nam Ki and Drav, with Six upon Drav's large shoulder pauldrons. Drav lays Six down as Nam begins to wipe the dried blood from around his eyes so he can see. Deftude kneels before Six, grabbing his face. Six opens his eyes and sees his teacher, Nam, and Drav. Deftude pats him twice on the side of his cheek and says, "You're safe." The aircraft flies off into the night sky lit by the moon and the mysterious light approaching. Thanks for watching Peoplz and Dragons, the interactive RPG game show. I encourage everyone to jump into our comment section to participate in the lore contests, as well as visit our Patreon page to learn what perks come with your support for our machine. Peace.